Hey, Morgan.
Hey Melanie, I'm so sorry for the
That's
for the
okay. We did it.
craziness. I hope, yeah, I hope we've got it all straight now. Thanks for your patience, everyone. We'll give everybody a moment to get back on. I've used this technology several times now, but it's a surprise every time. You just never know. Well, how are you,
Technology
Melanie?
just doesn't like me. I feel like I'm like technology cursed. So I'm sure it's just me.
And I'm sure it's not you. It's just it's just the usual. Anyway, guys. Okay, so all right, we're getting some viewers back on. Thanks for hanging with us. We'll just give another moment. But yeah, so we're here to talk about A Split in Time. And first, I guess I'll just start talking about hey Karen, hey everybody on. Can you hear us okay? Let us know about that and see make sure that all that's good. Okay. So the first thing we wanted to say is just an introduction about how this all started, right, Melanie?
Yeah, that'd be
And
great. And
it
by the way,
it
happy
all started
anniversary.
with this group. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And so, Melanie, I've been a fan of yours, for quite a few years, but we had never connected like online
Right.
until I asked you to be our first interview guest for the group. And so we just,
Yeah.
talked and stuff. And then out of that grew this book. I can't remember how it actually happened, but you said it was a conversation, right?
Yeah, I think so. I just remember us talking about it, and I think I said I wanted to write a book someday, and you're like, I do too. And so we started talking about it, and it's just been such a blessing to be able to do this with you because you're so motivated and so creative and so stinking smart. It's just been so fun to work with you on it.
Stop flattering me, Melanie, because I think you're incredible. This is Yeah, it has been a total blessing to work with you and get to know
Mhm.
you and everything, like, and just learn. Oh my gosh, learn through the process of, doing this book and really making yourself break down why you do what you do and why this
Mhm.
works. And, you know, it definitely stretches you. Like I've been stretched. I'm not published yet, as y'all know, but I'm pursuing representation and publication. So I'm working on my craft still. So this book is helping me working through the process with Melanie. With this book has been awesome. So I will be using our book and the worksheets for my novels that I'm writing and working on.
That's awesome. And you are published now. You just have your first book. So you need to flash the book back up so the new
I'm
viewers can
true.
see
Yeah.
it.
Not, yay! Here it is. And
Yay.
well, let me flip it up in little picture. Let's see if I can. Yay! Yeah. So this is really exciting. Yeah. So I'm trying to think what else really with the intro. When we're celebrating our 1 year anniversary of the group, which I mentioned in the first video. So thanks everyone for creating what this community is. Like I'm just blown
Mhm.
away by the response we've had in a year and the awesome author interviews and the generous authors like Melanie and others that have given their books for our month long of giveaways, which has been awesome. I'm
Mhm.
so appreciative and I hope y'all have had a fun time. There's been so many winners.
Mhm.
And for those of you who haven't won, leave a comment today on this video or the other video and you'll be entered into our giveaway. So I guess we'll
Mhm.
start with that. I was going to mention, Melanie, I was going to see if you would talk about the novel analysis, which is a really cool part of our book, because
Oh, sure.
there's the two books that we feature in our book. We're actually giving copies away. So if you tell about the novel analysis.
Yeah. So, one of the parts of this book, and I should say that one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book a while ago is because I've started to do a lot of workshops about how to write split time or time slip fiction or dual timeline. One thing that we do, I should say, mention in the book is the purpose of the book is really to break down how to write this type of genre. A lot of us call it by different names, and we acknowledge that. And we say it can be called split time, multi timeline, all of that. But we're not going to get into that debate. We just want to teach how to actually write it. So you can call it whatever you want. We're not going to be offended. And so I was doing these workshops, trying to teach people and let people know what I've learned through the process. But honestly, my process as a writer is pretty messy. And I've told you that, Morgan. It's a little bit scattered, bit of a pantser with my writing. And so it was super good for me actually to go through and analyze how I write, why I write this way, what the process looks like for me and for other writers. And that was what was super fun, because Lisa Wingate and Susan Meissner and Heidi Schiavaroli and Leslie Gould and a whole bunch, Rachel Hawk, a lot of other authors contributed to this book as well to talk about their process. And so I felt like I was learning in the process of writing the book, which was a real big blessing for me. But one thing we did is we took all of the key components that I've found and you found kind of across the board in split time fiction. And these are all of the things that are typically in a time slip novel. And so we went through, we talked about what all those look like, kind of how to write those, how to incorporate those into your book. And then we took two novels. One was Amanda Dykes' just brilliant book, Whose Waves These Are, just this gorgeous written book. And she took all of those elements that we mentioned, she has in that book. And then we took one of mine, we took Catching the Wind, and analyzed that, comparing that with all of the different elements in a time slip book, and broke that down and talked about specifically how you use those techniques, those elements within fiction.
Yeah, and that's something was a really helpful thing, because you can read tips and things about the book, about the actual style, this style and how to write it, but having examples that are actually picked apart and analyzed really helps you break down the pieces in your mind and see them in action. Like especially if you're a hands-on visual learner, which I am, so it's really nice to actually read a book and be like, here is where this happens or this happens. And
yes.
that was really helpful for you to develop, the breakdown of that, Melanie. I think that's going to help a lot of people. And it's just really interesting too.
Good. I'm glad it was helpful. It was definitely helpful for me to think through the process. So I hope that it's helpful for other writers, because my heart, and I know your heart as well, Morgan, through the Facebook page and your Goodreads shelf and all of that, is to help and give other writers the tools to be able to write this, because we would like to see this genre, and it's becoming a genre, continue to grow and build, because we want to write it for a long time. Yes. We like it. We want to keep going. And if other writers continue to write it, in it, then we can continue on with this.
Definitely. And another part of that too is this book, which I want to mention at some point, is not just for writers of this genre, it's for avid readers of this genre. So you've got people like in our group who may not write, but they love this style. And so the cool thing is, as a reader, if you get our book and you read through it, especially the interviews with all the authors that we love, like a bunch of authors, that we love their books, that's a cool thing. And then just being able to break down as a reader all the different parts, so that when you're reading the novels, you can be like, oh, that was a baton, or this was this, or okay, cool. So I had someone tell me about that too. That was a cool part of it.
Good.
Let's see, we have some comments like, all right. Thanks guys. Thanks for your comments about, thanking us for writing the book. We're just, honestly, anybody else could have written this too. It just happened that nobody had yet. And Melanie and I, God brought us together with that. So I'm just appreciative that we both were like, there just needs to be a book. And y'all had been asking me from the beginning of the group, like, do you know what, books are out there, resources and things? And I was just like, and I'd been searching, like Googling the mess out of it, honestly, y'all, like trying to find these little hidden gems of things. And I'd found some blog posts here and there, like Rachel had a blog post and Melanie had some things, but it was just all, different little pieces. And so it was cool to be able to explore all the things that I'd found and read in books, and Melanie and her writing and everything, and just kind of put it all together. And we really try to think through, like, if we were starting out not knowing anything about this, what can we get from this book? Or if we are, a seasoned writer of other genres, even, how will this book help us on that level as well? So we think it reaches, we think it's able to be at a beginning level or an advanced level.
Yes, exactly. That's my hope as well. That anybody who's interested in writing it or who has written it, as you know, starting to write it, is able to pick it up and just learn from it. And because I love learning, every time I read a different time slip novel, I'm like, oh, that's so neat. Like we've broken down all the formats, like how people typically format the book, right? We got the staccato and we've got the sandwich and we've got all the different types. And I love reading a book and being like, having my eyes open. Oh, they did this style or that style. And then I continue to learn from other people.
Yeah, I totally do the same thing, and I think it's just so cool about this style too. Is like we said, not only is the name optional, like you can kind of call it whatever you want almost, but you can write it. I mean, you can write the different styles,
Mm-hmm.
and there's styles that will be developed that we didn't write about because they don't exist yet.
Yeah,
They exist in
exactly. Which is
someone's
exciting. Yeah.
mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Melanie, if you have anything else to add, you can go ahead. But if not, we can go ahead and start some of the questions. If that sounds good to
Yeah.
you,
Let's dive into the
let me
questions.
know.
Yeah.
Sounds great. All right. Well, let me get our list. Okay. So our first question is from Abby, and sorry if I mispronounce your names because I only see them. So this is Abby, maybe Brooklander. Brooklander. What is your favorite part of writing a split time? Right, Melanie, what do you think? What's your favorite part? I'm gonna put you on the
All
spot
right.
first.
No, that's fine. My favorite part, I love the challenge of it. Like it's super fun for me, first of all, to be able to take a historical and contemporary plot and start to weave them together. So I enjoy that process. It is a challenge. Sometimes I have no idea where the book is going and how the story is going to end. And so a little bit on edge at times, but I enjoy kind of figuring out and wandering with my characters through that process. But the reason that I started to write it was because I was very interested in writing historical fiction, and I've done a number of historical novels. Love that genre. But I always wanted to know, how does the story end, right? Like you end it, you write it in 1850 or whatever. And then, whatever happened to these characters and their descendants, and what happened years later as a result of the choices that they made in 1850 or 1950 or whatever time period that we choose as writers. And I wanted to know kind of the end of the story. So to me, the beauty of time slip fiction is getting to know the end of the story. We find out what happens all these years later and how those decisions or events or whatever, how it impacted people down the line. So I love that. So I already had a heart and like desire to write this from the very beginning. Like when I first started to write fiction before this was ever a genre, I liked that direction. But it wasn't until I read Sarah's Key, and I know you've read that too, Morgan, and we're influenced by
Yes.
that. I read Sarah's Key, I want to say about 15 years ago. And I read that book and I was like, this is what I want to write. Like it all like came together for me when I read that story because it had the historical, but then it had the contemporary people trying to solve and find out what happened to Sarah. Sarah and her brother. Her brother had disappeared, and what happened to her brother, and did Sarah ever find him? And all these great story questions that came up, and I couldn't put the book down. And so after I read that book, I was like, this is what I want to do. And thankfully, I've had the opportunity to be able to do that.
Totally, and that book's very haunting. I think that's a good word for
Mhm.
it. And that was one of
Yeah.
the first split times I'd read. If I think the very first split time I read was either Shape of Mercy by Susan Meissner or The
Mhm.
Butterfly and the Violin by Christy Cameron, and then Sarah's Key
Oh,
was
both
somewhere
great
in there
books.
close. And then I jumped right
Mhm.
in with like Kate Morton and you and different people. So I just was like on fire. Like, give me all the split time, especially in
I love
Christian
it.
fiction. It took a little while for it to get going. It was already in general fiction. It was already a thing. And then it was just cool to see it kind of merge and spread into Christian fiction, which was great. And it's cool
I agree.
that people like you and Susan Meissner and several others were already, thinking in this vein and wanting to write this when it didn't exist, especially in Christian
Mhm.
fiction. So I
Yes.
think that's really cool. And my favorite part is pretty much, a lot of what you shared too, but just that weaving of two stories, which is tricky and challenging. We know that because it's literally, two like mini books in one, which is really difficult to think about when you really think when you wrap your head around that. But it's just that connection to the past. Just so the reason I love to write it is because I'm a writer and because I love to read it. And the style as a reader got me first. And then
Mm.
from reading it, just the story just came from that. And the story and part of our book we have questions about, different things for you to determine if your story idea is, can work split time or time slip, or if it's better for,
Right.
possibly better for a straight historical contemporary. But one thing is, I know with my story ideas, like they had to be told this way. And I know Melanie's the same way, like the stories, because you have some straight historicals and some straight, do you have a straight contemporary or just
Yeah, I
like
have several straight
historical?
contemporaries. But usually my contemporaries have some sort of
Okay.
past
Yeah. So
mystery.
you've been a
Yeah.
mix.
Hmm.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, and so even with your, the different other genres that you tapped into, like you're coming back to this blending of the
Hmm.
genres into one, which is so yeah.
Yes.
So the reasons I love to write it are the reasons I love to read it, honestly. That
Hmm.
connection from the to the present to the past. Because I always think with my head, it sounds crazy. This is funny to say, like I think with my head in the past, but we all do. We're always thinking about memories,
True.
things that happened last week, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. I mean, right now, especially with the pandemic, a lot of us, have been thinking
Hmm.
about, times in our lives, just in our lifetime, that have been as, you know, life changing as this or similar, whether it was a personal
Mm.
loss or 9/11, these big things that mark our lives and our lifetimes. And then you think about Susan Meissner's book, As Bright as Heaven, with the 1918 pandemic, I believe it is, the Spanish influenza. Is that
Mm.
right? I think so. So then you think,
Yeah.
just over 100 years ago, that happened and that changed the world how it was then. So, so just, we're always thinking in the past, parts of us. And so I
Hmm.
think that's one reason I connected with this style was just my mind, my thoughts are partially in the past. So, okay, you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah, and I love all these comments. It just makes me so happy to see all these people that are researching and writing their first and or multiple novels. But I love that so many people are interested in this genre.
I am too. It's just exciting. And it just, well, you know what that means? We have more to read. We'll have more to read. Hooray.
Exactly. Yay for us.
I know. So it's really exciting to hear about all the up and comers, the ones who are publishing for the first time like this fall and early next year. Like Amanda Cox and Ashley Clark, and there's several others that I know it's their debut novel, Split Time, coming out. So that's
That's
really
great.
exciting. So Maria asked, "What is your favorite time era to write about?"
Yeah.
My
And I have,
I'll
oh, go
answer this
ahead.
first if that's okay.
Mhm.
All right, that's cool. I don't want to throw you under the bus every time for every question, Melanie. Like go, Melanie. So I'll jump on this one next. Maybe we can take turns. Um, I of course gravitate to World War II. That's one of my favorite eras, and that's of course a really popular era in time slip fiction. But also I love like all kinds of history. So I've really tapped into different eras. I think I go more with what Susan Meissner talked about at our interview with her, where she was talking about how she keeps her fiction early 1900s to 1950 in that pocket, early 20th
That makes sense.
century. So I think I fit in that category, though I do have one or two ideas that I'm working on that would be a little bit before that. So Melanie, do you
Mhm.
have a favorite? I mean, I know you write in one pocket, but
Yeah, I do. And I have to tell you that Maria, who asked this question, I actually got to meet her last year. She was in
really?
Germany. She lives, I know. And I think I see a hi from Germany, and it doesn't tell me the names on the comments here, but I suspect that's Maria.
The high was from
I was
Maria.
very
Yep, I can see it. The
yeah,
high's from Maria.
Yeah. So Maria, I was there researching for my next novel coming out called The Curator's Daughter, and she lives there. And so she came and she got me, and we went to, they call it in Germany, Frankenstein's castle. It was the coolest old castle, and explored and had lunch and stuff.
Oh,
So it happened to be your birthday that day, so it was such a treat. But to answer your, hi Maria, shout out. So to answer the question though, I love like my historical fiction. I've actually just started writing biblical fiction. So now I've written from like about year zero up to now. So I've kind of covered all, a number of different time periods. I don't think that I specifically have a time period that I like writing about because I'm just kind of fascinated by everything. So I'm fascinated
Mhm.
by all sorts of different time periods. But I should say, in time slip fiction, right now, World War II era seems to be doing really well. Readers want to read about that era. And I think it's because it's really the last, I mean, it was very clear, at least in our minds, the good and evil in that scenario. And so many
Mhm.
people, just kind of everyday people, just jumped in to help their neighbor. And so I think that people are fascinated by that era, and I am as well. But I like writing it in time slip because I enjoy having my personal, this is not a rule or, in time slip, but me personally, I like having my contemporary characters in some way physically be able to get in touch or meet one of my past characters. So I
Yes,
like
I
that
love that.
bringing together. Yeah, I kind of like that. We call it the crash or something at the end where it kind of like the fireworks, right? At the end when it kind of all comes together. And World War II fiction and kind of beyond that, moving up to our current era, is a great place to write about when you want everything to come together.
Yeah, I agree, and it's cool too that I mean with time slip and time, and you can set it, you could do that in different eras too, because at this point
Mhm.
with that the greatest generation, they're called that for a reason. With them, a lot of, especially the veterans, like there's not many left. There's not a lot of times that you can set the story in true present day, like 2020.
Right.
So you're setting it maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So if you wanted to do that same kind of technique, you could do it 50 years ago. I mean, there are novels that are starting to pop up more and more where it's two quote historical timelines, and we do mention that in our book. So that's a really cool
Yes.
thing that's starting to really pop up more is and then you do things like Christy Cameron did with her three timelines where you have like the 1700s maybe or the 1800s, and then you have like the 1940s, and then you have the present day. It just depends,
Yes.
you know, sky's the limit. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to dissect, and figure out like, ooh, like you hear about a new split time novel and you're like, oh, what's the trigger? What's the time frame?
Yes. And I think that's such a good point, Morgan, in that we mentioned this in the book, like you said, but the contemporary timeline doesn't have to be 2020 or 2021. The contemporary timeline, in Misu Andrews' latest
Mm-mm.
book, A Fire and Lions, I think it was called, but her contemporary timeline was BC. It was 1,000 years or something before Christ. So you can have your contemporary, and then she had a historical thread, further back. So your contemporary thread doesn't have to be like modern day. It can be close into your historical
Yeah, today.
era so that your characters can continue to connect. Yeah.
And it depends on what your story needs. And part of the worksheets we have
Mhm.
in our book ask questions to try to get to the heart of what your idea is, like to get deeper into your idea and to figure out, what timelines will help best serve this story. What does it need to be? So
Yeah.
you don't have barriers on, oh, well, I have to have a contemporary be in the last 10 to 15 years, quote
Right.
contemporary, to be, so there's cool to know that you have more freedom. There's not as many barriers. Like there's some genres that have very, very clear structures, like especially the
Mhm.
romance genre has very clear structures of how it is. And you really don't have a lot of leeway with that because that's how the structure is. But with this genre, there's not one. There's not going to be one. If it keeps growing enough, we could start breaking into subgenres of split time, which would be crazy, like thrillers and, those kind of things.
Yeah.
But right now, we're just a burgeoning genre itself. So maybe one
Mhm.
day we'll get to subgenres within
There you go.
time slip, right?
Could very well happen. If everybody out there keeps writing it, it could
And
very well happen, and reading it.
yeah, yes, yes, please. So the writers, y'all, just get on that, because and I'm excited to be able to add more books to the bookshelf. On noting of that, if you know of any split time novels we haven't really talked about in our group very much, let me know, because I want to add them to the bookshelf in our Goodreads group, because that's an ever growing bookshelf. I have it organized by tag, so I want anybody, whether you're a writer or reader, to be able to go on there and say, I want to see if there's anything written in the 14th century or anything like that.
Mm,
So that's something. Okay, next question. We'll move on. We got Stacy Yulfort. I'm sorry y'all if I pronounced the names wrong. I love y'all. do you write one storyline at a time or go back and forth? We definitely hit this a little bit in our book, but different styles. The authors hit this in the questions, because this is a question we asked the authors, the collaborators in our book, contributors.
yes. And every author does it differently.
I'll let you take this one first. I'll do the next one first.
Yeah. And for me, and like every author, I think Leslie Gould said that it just depends on the book, right? Sometimes she writes them separately. Sometimes she writes the whole story together. I personally I write it from beginning to end, like the reader is going to read it. I write, usually I start with a historical thread, not always, but usually a historical. And then I go to contemporary, and it's called the staccato format is what we've tagged it, but back and forth rather quickly from past, present. And in that, it just kind of flows for me. Like there's, the contemporary character is searching for something. You get a clue in the past. Something happens in the past, then the contemporary character learns about it. And so it's just this back and forth. It would be very difficult for me, and the way I write time slip, to separate it. Now, that being said, I've had readers tell me, and maybe some of you have done this, they will read my books. They'll read the historical all the way through and skip all the contemporary chapters. And then they'll read the contemporary chapters all the way through. And, so, however, it doesn't matter. Read it the way you want, write it the way you want, however it flows best for you as a writer.
Yeah, and I will say I tend to go with a staccato kind of style too. But so my first split time novel I wrote like Melanie does, just from beginning, like chronological, right, from beginning to end, back and forth.
Yeah.
I will have to say it can be extra challenging that way. It just depends on the person, but also I would kind of say, recommend that if you're writing this for the first time, you might want to try just writing the first few chapters back and forth and kind of see how it goes, because it can be hard to switch characters, especially if you don't have a lot of experience writing fiction. Because after I wrote my first one, it was the hard part about that was it wasn't necessarily switching back and forth characters for me. It was the editing. Because the problem is if you have to heavily edit either storyline, you have to make sure it all meters out right. Because if you introduce, so say a special object in the present day, you have to make sure in the past they've already introduced that if that's your play you're doing. So it wouldn't make sense if you start trying to cut and move stuff. If you start trying to move stuff around, that's when it gets honestly kind of crazy. So I would recommend that if you're starting out, especially in fiction in general, but in this style, you kind of play with it. You kind of do an experiment. You kind of write a few chapters and try our sectional and sandwich and staccato methods and kind of see what you feel would work. And just know that your story needs to be on the tighter end, so that when you go back and edit, you're not having to do major changes and things. Because that's one of, I think, the hardest things about editing this style is when you start editing or moving things, that it can get the whole sequence out of order. Things might get introduced at the wrong time. And that's what I was facing. Yeah, exactly. And so with my next split time, what I did was I've written the beginning. It starts in contemporary. So I've written the first several chapters in the contemporary like it is in the book. And then I'm writing the whole past, and then I've gone back and written the contemporary woven in. So you just experiment and see what works for you. Don't
Yeah.
get discouraged. This is not a the easiest way to start if you're just starting writing fiction, for sure. But just start writing and see it. And if you are overwhelmed, if you are just starting out, then try your hand at just straight contemporary or straight historical or short stories. We mentioned that in the book. A great way to start is, just doing short stories and really getting your writing voice and the way you kind of, do things. I did that for a long time, is write short stories and shorter books.
Mhm. Smart. Yeah.
Anything else to add, or you want to move on to the next question?
Oh, yeah, let's move on.
All right. Connie Scruggs asked, how do you decide which timelines will fit together well? Okay, I'll start this one. So timelines, it really I would say depends on the heart of your story. I mean, it's those story questions of, and like I said, we have worksheets, we have checklists in our book that have these questions that to really help you think deeper. Questions like, is this story idea, does it have to be told in time slip? Can it be told straight?
Yeah.
Either way, straight historical or straight contemporary. If that's the case, then your storylines are probably not connected enough, because that's the thing. They have to be so interwoven together that you can't break the cord. You can't take them apart.
Right.
Because to an extent, you'll say your historical storyline could stand alone, possibly, but your contemporary would not be able to. Your contemporary would make sense, so it's really, I'd say, just deciding. It decides the heart of the story, whether it needs 3 times. Then you got to decide on timelines, just 2 timelines, 3 timelines. So what do you think, Melanie?
Well, this is your first time slip novel. Don't do 3 timelines. That will drive you crazy. Yeah, you're absolutely right with what you said. I think that it's the contemporary, especially, typically, and again, the elements, the quite rules that we wrote in this book, they can be broken, and they have been broken, and so it's not every novelist that writes this way. It's just typically this is what happens. Usually, there's some sort of mystery in the contemporary. And one of the elements that we say in the book is there needs to be a reason for your contemporary characters to want to find out what happened in the past. And there's got to be a reason, and it's got to be compelling. Like they have to know, they have to be able to find something, they need it now. Like, and why do your characters need it now? Are they trying to, it could be something simple, like in Sarah's Quiche. She was at first trying to write a story, right? An article about it. And then it became a family matter, and it became more and more pressing as time went on. And then it became very personal, right? And that's often what happens with these time slip novels. It's something kind of big at first, and then it becomes really personal to the character, and they feel like, I have to resolve this for my own well-being and for the well-being of my family, or whatever that is. So yes, I think that, I just think your contemporary character needs to have a reason to solve it, and solve some sort of problem. And if they don't do that, then you're right. Like they have to work together. You can't have just your contemporary. And honestly, you can't really have your historical in a time slip novel without the contemporary part, because if you're writing it well in the contemporary section, you're sprinkling in bits about the past. And that's another element we talk about, right? That you're telling in the contemporary and showing in the past. So in the present, you are giving facts, giving things that we kind of know throughout history that the historical characters haven't yet discovered because they haven't lived through it yet. So you're foreshadowing it through the contemporary. So if you can take them apart.
One thing in the book is World War II. The past character does not know that maybe the war's coming or how the war's going to end, but the present day person knows how it all turned out. So that's a really interesting dynamic. And that's information that their research brings in that the past character has no access to yet because it hasn't happened, or they don't know it's happening at that time.
Right. And it just ups the tension, the conflict. You got to keep reading the pages because the contemporary character knows, but the past doesn't know yet. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I totally agree. And I was going to say too, we have one breakdown in our book is called Keys to Write Time Slip Fiction, and it's 13 elements to help direct the structure of your manuscript. And in those elements, we tried to give examples from books, from actual split time and time slip novels that, we've read. And so that gives you another chance of knowing, like, oh, well, this kind of thing happened in this book. And we tried to use as many examples as we could to help help y'all be able to correlate the element with the actual book situation too.
Right.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Arletta Bolton, she asked, because you write split time stories, does it require you to do more plotting and planning? This is Melanie. Take it first on this one.
Okay, it's a great question. And, the answer to it is yes. It requires me to do more plotting and planning. But I am not a plotter and a planner. So that, it ends up being very little. But it's more than what would happen if I wrote a straight historical novel, right? So it's a step for me in the right direction. So I like to say it's, for me, writing is a journey. I started a journey. I have a character. I have an idea of, I actually grabbed some books they're kind of cheat sheets for me too, because I don't always remember everything I wrote. But Memories of Glass is a good example for this question, because it's based on a real story. And so in the real story, it's just this marvelous true story about a group of people in Amsterdam who rescued 600 Jewish children right out from under the Germans. I mean, the Nazis were like basically standing there, but they took them off the records. They were able to escape and get them out just kind of by using the German system. And it was just amazing, incredible true story. So when I went to write that book, I knew in general what the historical was going to be. Now I embellished from there, and I created this whole story with my characters, but I had an idea of what was going to happen. The contemporary, I didn't know, and I started out one way, and then I took a different direction. Like I said, I'm going on a journey. I probably know the destination. Maybe I don't. I usually get sort of close to the destination, but my process on the way looks a whole lot like this. And I so admire those of you who can plan. Morgan, you're a planner. My friend Sarah Sundin, who writes World War II fiction, she's a planner. She has the whole thing planned out. She's got sticky notes. I mean, she does everything. I don't even know what's going to happen in the next chapter usually until I get there. So anyway, for me, it's a lot of fun. I love it.
I don't know how you do
stressful.
it. Oh my gosh, I'm sweating. I'm sweating.
You're sweating, nervous.
I love it. And that's what we talked about, when we first started talking about the book and the contents and stuff and how our approach was. And yeah, I'm definitely a plotter. I mean, there's still always an element of organic where the story's taking you a little, there's still some leeway even when you're a super plotter. Like, I'm a pretty detailed plotter, I'd say. But I think that's something too that I may loosen up on as I write more split time. But right now, like, I try to have the storyline really tight, the research really tight, just to kind of know, where it's going. And sometimes, I may know the ending, but I don't know all the middle. So I still have a tiny bit of pantsing, but I'm definitely a plotter. So it was cool to know, like, be able to talk about that. So it really doesn't matter if you're a pantser or a plotter, though. You will have to do a tiny bit, like you said, a tiny bit more plotting than you would on a straight novel. But so we'll move on to the next question because we're getting short on time.
And Morgan, just really quick,
yay!
One other
we got a
thing
later start there.
Is that, and you're right. Like, it takes more planning for the planner. For the pantser like me, it takes a whole lot more editing at the end. And that's one thing I've discovered with time slip fiction. With my process, I get to the end of my book and I'm like, this is a mess. I figured out where I'm going by that point. So I know the direction of the story, but I've got to come back and I rewrite and I rewrite. So, either going to do it at one side or the other, I guess.
I can't imagine like you saying your book's a mess. I can't, because they just turn out so amazingly well. But I know the messy process that you go through. But so that's okay, y'all. If your first draft is still a mess, you can You can salvage it. It's totally fine. Like I did the same thing. I rewrote most of my very first split time novel. So, just experiment. Just experiment and see what happens. Our next question is Linda Fletcher. Have you ever written a split time story where you had to trash one of the storylines and start all over from scratch? If so, how'd you fix it? What an appropriate question to follow that with.
Yeah.
And I will say that, yes, that happened in my very first split time novel for sure. Like, it was a mess. The historical, I think, was pretty tight, but the contemporary was a mess. So I had to rewrite most of that. But the hard thing is when you've written it back and forth, but yet you're going back just to fix one storyline. That's what drove me insane, was trying to fix all that and make sure it all lined up. So I'm trying different techniques to try to figure out what works for me so I don't get in that pickle again. But what do you think, Melanie? Have you had to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have, but it's always right at the beginning of the story. Like I know, I just kind of feel like instinctively know, is this working or not? And Chateau Secrets, which was my first truly time slip novel that I published. I was trying to write the contemporary section and I wrote it was so hard. And I mean, writing's hard, but this was abnormally hard for me to get this character's and I knew kind of the direction I was going, but I just couldn't get it to work. I was so frustrated. And so then I realized, I went back and I wrote it in first person. And we talk about POV in the book, but I wrote it in first person and it just poured out of me. And I'm like, okay, this story, this character needs to be told in her perspective in first person instead of the typical third person. And it changed everything. So once that clicked, I went with it. With Memories of Glass, the book that I just showed, I started out a completely different first chapter, and for my historic and for my contemporary, actually. And again, it just wasn't working. And so I went back and rewrote both of those. And once I had that direction, I very rarely, I'll rewrite a lot in the rest of the book, but I very rarely have to rewrite those first chapters because I just have this picture. I don't know the ending, but I've got a picture in my mind of where the journey starts. And then I go from there. Have I ever got through a whole time slip novel and scrapped the whole time, the whole plot of past or present? No, I've never done that. I usually know at the beginning whether or not it's going to work.
Yeah, I think that's important too, is really experiment in the beginning. And I think that's where whether you're a pantser or a super plotter, you need to make those decisions. And we talk about that in our book, like make a decision on the POV, how many timelines. Those are types of things that you can experiment in the beginning with, but you need to kind of decide early on, because if you get through and you write that whole thing, it's not super easy to go back and fix major issues with the split time. Like it might be easier to pour a straight historical straight. That's the pickle I had myself in, because I'd been like, I felt naturally that I would just want to write it back and forth. Well, when I did that, it's just one storyline was way stronger than the other, and I could not go back. I could not fix the other. I mean, I had to go back and fix the other one, and that's what really will give you a headache, is having to do that. But it is necessary. And so the best way to, like you're saying, the best way to try to counter that is to try to try some different things. Try that first opening chapter from, third person, first person, and really explore the idea, brainstorm before you're even starting to write. Like, is there another level this story could be taken if I put another storyline with it? Like Christy Cameron's Lost Castle series, or am I really digging deep enough in this? Because I mean, you're having to plot character arc for two separate storylines that also have to meet, and that's not something that is just, it's going to come to you or not. Like, you have to work to really think about it and get your head wrapped around it.
Yeah.
All right, and this kind of goes into the next question. Danielle Smith asked, how do you seamlessly tie the two time splits into one storyline so they flow seamlessly? That kind of goes into that. I think it's your turn to start, Melanie. We're almost done with questions.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a great one. And that we spend a lot of time in this book about that because I think I know Morgan, you get a lot of questions. I get a ton of questions in my email. Great questions. And this is one of them. Like how do you make that flow work? How do you go back and forth and make it seamless? And so there's some tricks. There are a few little tricks that we've learned over the years. One of those we call that passing the baton. And once you're familiar with this technique, you'll start seeing it more in time slip where something will be happening, say in the past. They'll be in a storm, or sometimes it's setting like that, or a storm, or sometimes it's I think one of my books, I had my character was petting a cat, and you flip over the contemporary and that character is petting a cat. And so you take there's a storm in the past, there's a storm that starts out in the present. And so there's just these little elements, you probably would never even catch it if you're not looking for it, where it just seamlessly takes you from past to present with sort of these commonalities of things that both of the characters could be doing, even though they're two completely different generations. So you don't want to overuse that, but it's just a technique that helps with that smooth sailing. Another is emotion. That one character, in the past could be having a similar emotion to the one in the present. But I think the big thing is the reveals, right? You're revealing something in the past, and then the contemporary character finds something in the present that either adds to what's happened in the past, or it's something new that then you go to the historical section and it relates to that. And I don't know that I'm explaining that. It's much more thought out in the book with examples, but it's this
hard
slow
though. It is
reveal
hard to explain it.
Yeah, that both the past and the present characters, and you're building on each other, even though you're in two completely different timelines. It's building in the reader's mind, and it just helps make that a smooth transition where it becomes one kind of, hopefully, if you do your job right, one sort of seamless story versus two choppy plot lines.
Mm-hmm. No, and sometimes, like you said before, that can be a person. It can be a person from the past storyline that they end up meeting in the present, or something going on with that, and that could be a cool baton, to tie the stories together. Just that connection, that physical connection. And sometimes it's an object, like you're saying, like not like it's an actual object that maybe guides the story, like the writing desk, Rachel's book, Out's book. And then there's different some symbol, like again my first book, it's the color red is used different ways between the storylines, and that kind of ties things in a bit. But it's just use your imagination and be thinking, and put like we do, put yourself in that contemporary character's shoes and really ask, like, how would what would be meaningful for me to connect to this historical storyline for me, like today or 10 years ago? What kind of methods, and is it a diary? Is it what is there, an object? Is there an event? Is there a person?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that you bring up with the object. There should be some sort of, we talk about that as well. Typically in time slip, there's some sort of object that is in both the past and the present. They found something in the present that relates to the past, or, it's just this, just a hint, kind of a nod back and forth. But you're right, it helps with that seamless, because whatever this object or piece or diary or whatever it is that was in both timelines guides the story and kind of smooths it out for the reader too.
And it gives them a visual. It gives them a visual to hold on to the story too. Like, if and the thing is, I think we relate it to our lives. Like if we have an heirloom quilt or a cabinet or a diary from a family member or something passed down, like that's a treasured thing. And even if you don't, you think about that and you're like, what if my family had a diary that was my great grandmother's and I got to read her story, or this woman that lived in this time and I discovered this diary? You really just put yourself in there and you think of the visceral connection you would have with that item if you found it or discovered it, or if it was passed down through the generation. Like the ring in Freedom's Ring by Heidi Chavaroli, just like a ring connecting these across the generations, across the centuries. It's just really, it's really cool. the sky's the limit with that too. You just
Yes.
kind of tap into what the heart of what your story is, and it may, well, one of the things I would go ahead and read the next question because what I was going to say kind of ties in with this. Um,
Okay.
I know her name's not L.A., but that's what it has on here. L.A. Bradier. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. I'm sorry. When searching for the historical connection to the present, is it something that you come across in your research process of history, or is it one of those ideas you come up with and you make it work? Well, the thing is, like what I was going to segue into is sometimes it's an object. Sometimes you're in a museum and you see something and it's something that you'd never heard of, like an object, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And then a story starts forming, or maybe something you're researching. Or for Christy Cameron, a painting like the Butterfly and Violin was inspired by painting, or just art history in general, or like just it could be the object be something you just have seen in real life, or maybe just in your research found. But I've had all the
Mhm.
above happen to me with my story ideas. And what about you, Melanie? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a variety. It's never the same thing. In Memories of Glass, it was something I stumbled on when I was doing my research about the group in Amsterdam that were saving the children. I found out that a number of American financiers, I think I'm saying that right, but banking people that were doing investing back in the 1930s were actually financing Hitler and Auschwitz and all sorts of things and making money off of the terrible stuff that was happening in the Holocaust. And they knew it was happening and they continued to invest in it as Americans. And so that was something that I stumbled on. So that to me, when having my contemporary character figure that out, what was happening, that was something that I stumbled on. And then other times I make it up. Like you said, in Catching the Wind. Well, actually, Catching the Wind was a
Mm-hmm.
combination because in Catching the Wind, I had, I have this character who's a little boy at first, and he makes little toy characters, little knights and little princesses. He carves them out of wood. And that's sort of my object that's in both the past and the present. But in my
Mm-hmm.
research for that book, I discovered that there were a number of people in England that were actually spying. They were spies and helping the Nazi Party. So when I found that out, that was a historical
Wow.
connection that was accurate, historically accurate, but it was something that I discovered in my research. So it happens both ways. Sometimes I just make it up, and sometimes it's true to life. And those were both two examples that were real to life.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing too, is like, I mean, if you're writing historical or split time, you've got to love history to a certain extent. So
Yes.
if we're watching a documentary on TV, or if you're reading a biography, or if you're just see something cool and you're like, oh, what's that? And you start Googling
Mhm.
it. There's just the sky's the limit with where you can find these little nuggets of ideas, these little sparks, I
Yes.
like to call sparks of ideas that and I just write them down. Like I just write them down or email them to myself and put them in a folder for future. I don't know if they'll go anywhere, but they could be your next time slip novel. The heart of it. So, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's just it's you putting yourself in an experience. Like some of it's inspired by other books. Like you may have read a fiction novel. This happened to me. Like you read a fiction novel, and then you're just like, oh, this timeline, this era, it's just gotten me. And you start thinking about it, and you think, well, what if that happened to me in this era? Then you start looking up something from that era, and you start going on a whole nother rabbit trail, a different direction, but it's within the era of the book you just read. There's inspiration everywhere.
Yes. Yeah, and people's stories. I love hearing people's stories, their personal stories or things that happened to their family.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my inspiration comes from just, somebody will email me and say, or, this is what happened to my grandmother. And I'd love to give you more information if you like to write about it. And sometimes it's not my story to write, and I'll say that, that's something that you or your family needs to tell. And sometimes it's just a huge honor for me for people to open up their family stories and tell me these different things, and then let me kind of run with it and create fiction out of it. So yeah, it comes from all ideas, and all of that come from all different places.
And I think the heart of it too, because it is fiction, is making sure your made up character or based on a character is authentic for that world. It's plausible, you
Yes.
know, and that's something I question myself all the time with my historical characters, especially is like, I'm making up this character. She is not even based off one person or a person. However, I know this could have been a situation because it's realistic, you know, so it just depends.
Yeah.
Just make sure, you know, the plausibility's there and within the world and within the culture and the time frame, especially for women, because we tend to, you know, as women writers, we tend to write female characters. And so females 20, 30, 100 years ago is a whole different world than it is for us now, the freedoms and everything. So it's just, you got to immerse yourself in that and know the limitations for your characters and know when you can rise above those limitations and be that one character that, you know, is the rebellious one or something, you know? So it's just asking those questions too. And when I'm reading a novel, I'm thinking that too. I'm thinking, is this based on a true person? Because it really just seems so real, you know? And I love the author notes in the back when I can read and they can be like, oh, this is based off a combination of these people or this inspired by this or, you know.
Me too. I love that. Mm-hmm.
Well, we can wrap up. It's been so awesome. I'm looking to see if we have any questions. I do see one question, which we kind of covered, but I'm going to make sure we cover it. So we only have one. Bonnie McCash, do you plot it all out and know how it will end before you begin writing the book? We kind of talked about that. Melanie, I want to ask you, since you're not as much of a plotter, do you know where it's ending or is that a surprise to you too?
Typically a surprise, which is good. I like that.
Wow.
Oh, it would drive you crazy, my process, Morgan. It would drive you bananas. But it's fun because I never know. And I like to write in coffee shops. I like to write in coffee shops and sometimes I'll come to my end and I'll just start crying because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I'll just, like, okay, this is what's going to happen. And my biggest stressful situation as a deadline though was catching the wind because I was about a week from deadline and there were all these threads out there and all these things happening, which I had fun writing. It was really fun, but I'm like, I have to pull this together. I mean, it's got to come together at some point, right? And I have to have an end. Readers like endings, and so do publishers. And so I'm like, I have to end this thing. And I mean, I was praying. I was like, I need to, please, Lord, give me an ending, and he did, and it worked. But it's just how I write it. But
it did work. It was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Phew. No, I don't start sweating. But it's important for me to keep myself engaged in the story, to be more of a pantser and just kind of discover the story along the way. And I feel like when I discover it, I'm hoping that the reader as well will have that kind of emotional journey that I had in discovering it, if that makes sense. And not exactly, I don't know. Now, I like happy endings. Usually it's going to, hopefully end on some sort of positive note, even no matter what happens in the historical section. Hopefully that in the present day, it ends on a very positive note. But yeah, it's a surprise to me and hopefully a surprise to readers too.
I love that. I'm sweating when I think about it. Yeah, well, the ending. Your endings are a surprise to me, but it's interesting that they're a surprise to you too. Because I think I work more in bookends, so I know the beginning of the story, and I know for sure the end. Like that's sometimes the end comes to me before the beginning. Sometimes I have to know the end so I can backtrack and know, well, how did we get to that point? So it's kind of the bookend effect for me, where I'm like, and sometimes it's backwards, like. I get the end, I get the beginning, and in the middle, I may have very, very clear scenes that I know, like these are points in the book that are gonna have to happen. I just see them in my mind like a movie, and I write those down. Like even if I'm really inspired, I'll go ahead and write a scene out in the middle. But I do like to write chronologically. I like to start in the beginning of the book and write like that, even if I'm splitting the timelines, which I'm experimenting with still, But yeah, so I still cry at my endings too. I don't know, even though I know it. I guess maybe it's like I finished. Cry now. I don't know.
Celebratory tears.
Cool. It's just cool to know everybody's different. Yeah, it's cool to know everybody's different processes and stuff, and it's just fun.
Mhm.
But we're out of time, and we're just so glad that y'all joined us. Melanie, thanks so much. Thanks for letting me write this book with you. It was a blast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for motivating and inspiring me and working with. I would just loved partnering with you on it. So I appreciate that. And you've got 2 books to give away, right?
It's fun, and thank you all. Yes, yes. So I'll be drawing those books in just a little while, and I'll be announcing it in the near future. So we'll have 2 winners. So at least comment once on this video or the other video that we started, and I will enter you to win one of these books. But anyway, yeah. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks so much for your interest in our book. I mean, it came
Mhm.
out of the questions you were asking us and me, and I just didn't know I was gonna be the one to
Mhm.
help write it. I had no idea. But I'm so blessed that I was able to be part of this project. And seriously, keep the conversations going, because we do have a lot of writers in our group. We have a lot of, that are mainly readers, but we need you readers. We need your opinions. We need you to
Mhm.
let me know. It was cool with
Absolutely.
the giveaways I've been doing. I've been asking questions, and I asked a question about what eras do you want to see in split time that you're not seeing represented. And there were so many eras, that everyone's talking about. So I hope that you writers who are thinking about ideas, the ones who may not have an idea yet, or you may just be wanting to know about, kind of what's going on, look back at those giveaway answers, and you can look at all the timelines people are wanting. So you just know
Mhm.
any timeline, biblical
Ah.
timeline, I have people asking me, like, is there a book that has medieval, like medieval this, or biblical,
Mhm.
or and so I try to find books to recommend, and that's why my Goodreads group is important to try to. You can look at all the tags, and then if you're not
Mhm.
really sure about an era you want to write in, go look at my Goodreads group, find that tag for that era, and see what books I have shelved that fit that, and you can kind of read it and see what's out there, and you never know what might inspire you. So,
Yeah.
any last words, Melanie?
No, well, yes, I always have a last word. Yeah, no, that's all good. Thank you. And like you said, just thank you to everybody who's here and has listened to this. And just, I love reading your comments and just getting insight, because those of us who write, we want to write things that you enjoy reading. That's our desire. And so it's a partnership really between
Yes.
the writer and the reader. And so I'm just grateful for everyone. And thank you, Morgan, for this opportunity. It's been super fun.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, everybody, just if you have any other questions, put them in the comments. We'll try to check, but we'll draw the winners, and y'all have a great weekend, and happy writing, happy reading, all of it. Just, keep this genre going, and we hope to see more and more books in this genre for years to come. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.